Friday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Who knows? Might be the last debate. They haven't agreed to a third one yet, so make sure you join us on Friday night. 100 undecided voters chosen by Galaxy Research. I'll be asking the questions, and I'll be there to keep control of the whole thing. Looking forward to that very much. Let's bring in Ben Oquist and Dave Gazzard, our panel this afternoon. I know you were both glued to it last night. No doubt you'll be watching Friday night as well. What did we learn last night, do you think? Dave?
I think that the shortened campaign has been holed below the waterline, and they are frantically pumping, but they've got to make the next 2.5 weeks to get through to the polling day by continuing to say, trust us, don't worry about the cost. And I think that is a major campaign error. I think you look at
this is on the cost of the climate policy.
There's a whole range of costs that we don't know about, and we'll get to Thursday night at midnight when it's too late after the blackout, and suddenly there'll be a range of costed policies that'll be either correct or incorrect. But he has to endure every day between now and then having to say that you can't cost it properly, oh, we're going to get to you later. And it is probably the most significant point of the preparation of a policy. What does it cost? People want to know. What is this going to cost them, right? And he won't say.
Well, let's just talk about this, the climate cost. We heard Mark Butler say today that it is impossible to cost. The safeguards mechanism is what they're using it. Yes, they're extending it. They're requiring a much stronger emissions reduction than the government does, but the government hasn't costed its existing safeguards mechanism, has it?
If you are going to go with a much larger package with a whole range of different elements that has a 45% renewable energy target, it's a sweeping reform, right? You've got to come clean with the Australian public and at least put a range of prices out there to say, this is where the world market is going. Here is the horizon that we think we're going to be in. This is what it's going to be as a cost of business. Rather than saying, well, it's a hazy thing and business will come to the party or they won't, and, you know.
It's a reasonable point, Ben, isn't it? That this is a much bigger impost on those businesses, those 250 businesses, than they currently face.
Well, this is the thing, and I think this is the thing that came out through the debate last night, is actually Labor's winning the climate debate. And Shorten got some of his best reaction when he said, well, we're going to take action on climate change.
True.
Now, I know the government thinks they're clever by talking about these costs all the time, but it's a bit like chasing smoke. At the one time, it's like, oh, the whole of economy cost of what modelling may or may not show that's out of date, or at some other time it's the cost of the budget. Now it's the cost of international permits. So I think they think they're being very clever in kind of making up these things that the coalition supposedly has to cost when they themselves are not costing it. But here's the thing. Every time they do that, they send the message they're not serious about taking action on climate change, and that's why it went down so well for Shorten. And I know that some of the press think they've been clever in saying cost, 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 which they don't do to Scott Morrison. Here's the question for Scott Morrison. They went all through last year saying we needed a climate and energy policy, we needed to integrate them, because without them, without the neg, power prices would rise $550. So now you have an emperor with no clothes, no effective climate policy to reduce emissions, and, by their own words, increased cost by $550. We haven't had that debate yet. And the pressure, I think, is going to come on Scott Morrison because of what happened in that debate, because it went down so well with the public when Shorten said we needed to act on climate change.
I fundamentally disagree with that, and here's the reason why. You can't, in an environment like it is now, where cost of living is the most important polled issue, right? Cost of living is absolutely everything. You can't go to an election just suddenly coming in and saying, well, we don't want to know what the cost of it is. We're taxing you a lot more. We want to get to a 50% target on electric vehicles. We don't even know what the cost of a vehicle is.
The government, its own credibility on this cost question is clouded by the fact that they've spent a year arguing the National Energy Guarantee was the only way to get costs down, and then it's abandoned it.
Yeah, well, it was political reasons for abandoning.
That's what I mean, political reasons rather than the cost.
So they've actually gone the other way and said, no, OK, that's fine, we'll have to find a new way in. But in the meantime, we are going to put pressure on every provider of energy to make sure you get the best possible deal going, right? That's where they've ended up going. So they've used the big stick against the providers of energy because the voter is the most important part of this.
They didn't sit the parliament enough to put it up for a vote.
They were going at this the end of last year. They've been pushing. Angus Taylor has been.
Why didn't they put it up for a vote?
Well, they are going to be found wanting, and this is the point that the Prime Minister thinks he's been very clever in focusing on the negatives of Labor's policy without having many policies.
Maybe that's right, Ben. But these facts matter, don't they?
Of course they matter.
Surely we can say business that currently isn't covered by the mechanism at all suddenly will, and they'll suddenly have to reduce their emissions by 45%. Well, that's going to cost that business.
It may be an investment. The businesses are going to get to... This is the point that Mark Butler made so well today, is that businesses are going to be able to choose. Now, the government likes to go on about international permits, but
they're going to have to reduce their emissions.
Every expert says that international permits will reduce the costs. So the government's mounting this big scare campaign about these international permits, but the government has a safeguards mechanism itself, and every expert will tell you allowing some international permits with quality and quantity controls will limit the costs on introducing such a scheme. Now, the government thinks it's been very clever, but as the policy debate unfolds over the next 2.5 weeks, we'll get back to the fact that every expert says we need to integrate climate and energy policy, because if we don't, prices will go up. And that's what the government argued all last year. Without an egg, prices would go up.
To wrap this up, the reality is that this line is clearly biting, because we've gone from 10 weeks ago, 54.46 to 51.49.
But it didn't bite the debate.
It's clear that people are worried about how much they're going to get stung for, and there's $389 billion, $387 billion in tax rises coming, and they're obviously worried about the cost of policies that Labor won't tell them.
Let's talk about won the debate on this topic.
Let's talk about wages. He's also announced this week plans to top up the wages of childcare workers. Ben, what do you think of this sort of policy approach, and does it legitimately open the door to others in aged care and disability to say, what about us?
Well, I think the big thing with childcare is we all know that it's better to have better quality childcare.
Sure.
And all the evidence shows from internationally, we've got a Nordic policy centre going. We've been looking at Nordic countries, and they invest more in childcare, more in quality childcare, more training, and you get much better results for the children all throughout their life. As any parent will tell you, you want quality childcare. But of course, how do you get that without paying more? And the other problem with childcare is it's too expensive. So the solution has to be more government investment in it if we're going to reduce the price. There's been some crazy ideas that suggest we need to regulate it less, and regulating it less will free the market up, and somehow that'll reduce costs. The reality is in the childcare sector, we need more regulation, we need more investment in it to both reduce the cost for parents and increase the quality. And as any economist will tell you, you pay more, you'll get better stuff.
But I know many will agree that childcare workers should be paid more.
Yep.
But if they are paid roughly the same as an aged care worker, why should they be paid more? Why shouldn't the aged care worker get the extra?
Well, we have to start somewhere, and this is the place where the discrepancies are biggest, and this is where the investment for our economy is best. This is where parents are saying the cost of living pressures are greatest, and we can't just put up our hands and say, let's not do anything.
Why is an employer in childcare going to put their hand in their pocket to top up wages, to give their workers a pay rise? Why would they bother?
Well, here's the thing, everyone says, the government cannot interfere in the free market and increase wages. The government does do that all the time, not, of course, just in the government sector, nurses, teachers, policemen, but we offer incentives to businessmen to employ the long-term unemployed, to businesses to employ people who haven't been employed in the workforce a long time. There is a role for the government in helping increase wages where wages are too low, and it's affecting the quality of a service that's important, not just for individuals, for children and their families, but for the economy overall.
Is that a fair comparison there?
I just think you have to go back to pre-Keating and Hawke and Bill Kelty as ACTU Secretary to get back into nationalised wage setting. That's how far the clock's being rolled back. Set aside the argument about childcare, to have the government, and let's face facts again around the haziness of the costing here. This was going to be for a whole range of workers until today, when suddenly, oh no, actually it's going to be just childcare. So get in line, right? This fits with the pattern bargaining stuff that we're seeing, where every worker in every industry should be able to negotiate wages no matter where they live, whether it's, Bendigo or Melbourne. We are going to see wage pressures start flowing through.
Well, Labor would argue we need to see wage pressures. We need to see wage increases. A lot of Australians feel they just haven't had a pay rise. And I'm not sure if you can set aside childcare. There is a problem there, isn't there, where...
I had a discussion with a pollster about this, because I said, how can we have cost of living pressures as high as they are after 28 years of continuous growth? I mean, inflation is low, right? So wages growth is eclipsing inflation. So the reality is right you have actually had a pay increase, albeit small, right? And everyone would like to have higher wage increases. The new norm is to have things that we haven't had before. So the way the pollster explained it to me was, for 10 years, a family's been going on an overseas holiday. That's now become the norm. They've got iPhones, they've got iPads. Their expenditure level has risen, right? So while there's this feeling that they've got higher expenditure and wage hasn't kept up, the reality is we've had 28 years of continuous economic growth, right?
So families are to blame for this cost of living pressure. They're blowing too much cash on overseas holidays.
It is just the way it's going. Do you fundamentally reorganise the economy to take
Coming back to childcare, though, the point is no one wants to increase the fees, because that has a disincentive for parents returning to work, women in particular. And so that's I guess, an economic productivity argument as to keeping fees down. So how else do you get the worker a pay rise that doesn't have the consequence of pushing up the fees for parents? I mean, is there a better way to do it?
Without some government support. And I think this goes to the bigger picture about what this election campaign is right. And now, David might be right. If people don't want change, they're going to vote to keep this government in. I mean, there is a problem in childcare. There is a problem in wage growth. There is a problem in climate change policy. There are problems that the community is feeling. There is the problem of inequality, despite, you're right, 28 years of uninterrupted economic growth. People think there's something wrong. Now, if I'm right, and people do think there's something wrong and that they want change, they're going to vote for Labor. If they don't want change and they think it's all right, this is Scott Morrison's argument. Just attack what Labor is coming up with. No new policies for himself. He's more like running for the mayor of Australia, announcing that CCTV stuff today. Not one question from the press gallery today about his announcement. He will win. He will win. Yeah. But if people think that the system is not good and change is needed, whether it's on climate change or wage growth, Bill Shorten will win.
Well, that may be true, but as Prime Minister, Bill Shorten will have to try and deliver what he's promising.
Absolutely.
And if he's going to have every other union knocking on his door going, well, what about our aged care workers? What about our disability workers? What about our hairdressers and so on, who aren't paid what they should be? This is what we should be talking about now, isn't it? How does he do all this in government?
Well, he started with one sector and saying, let's do that. I accept...
He said, well, let's start with that.
But yes, but it's an ambitious, progressive agenda that Bill Shorten has. And I don't think there's been a progressive agenda since Gough Whitlam. That's true. But he's got a mandate for that. But he's also got a... Not yet. No, if he won. But he's also got... he's also said things he won't do. He said it's only for childcare today. So I think he's...
Is it well thought through, though, do you think? We don't even know how... which childcare worker is going to get the pay rise?
And here's the thing about, does him have a mandate? And people are worried about cost. I actually think those cost arguments that the government was always going to run against Labor and run against every election. They can't handle money, they can't manage money. Absolutely, they always run them. But I actually think Labor's in a much better position to argue that this time, because not just for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, but for 2 terms, they've been setting out an ambitious revenue agenda about how things are going to be paid for. They have done the hard yards. They have done franking credits. They have done capital gains tax.
I know they've got the revenue there, but it just seems a lot of the details aren't there. When it comes to how will this work? What will the Fair Work Commission do? Which childcare workers?
Of course, there's going to be.
Are other sectors going to get it?
Of course, there's going to be a level of detail to be required, but you cannot argue that a Labor opposition with an ambitious progressive agenda and this much extra revenue being advocated is running a small target policy. They're putting out more detail than ever before.
And let's just finish on this point, because there is a pretty strong view, David Gazard, that Scott Morrison really lacks vision, lacks a third-term agenda. There's a bit of tax cuts, but that's it. Do you think he needs more?
I think what we've seen is Morrison picking up really for the last 3 weeks of the campaign where the fundamental differences of the parties are at the moment, right? And you've seen sort of the demolition of the magic pudding. I mean, it's been
This is the so it's not a
quite
magic
well.
pudding attack. I get he's
Look,
been on the attack.
I don't know what they've got to announce coming up. I really don't know.
But this is the point.
I
mean,
would say,
do you have in your mind right now an idea of what the Morrison government, if re-elected, would do in its first 6 weeks?
Mayor of Australia.
the Mayor of Australia. I tell you what.
Tolly quite likes that, by the way.
Right. So,
I tell you what.
You're right. If people don't want change, they'll vote for him.
This is what we've had over the last 6 years. We've had a range of big promises. We went right back into go back into the Short and Gillard government. Huge promises, sweeping vision, and then under delivery. So I think actually the PM is going smaller to impress voters that this is manageable, right? And he's saying, don't look at what I say, look at what I've done. That's where the focus has been. I've been Treasurer for 3 years. We're back in surplus.
I stopped the votes when I was...
Correct. So it is achievable items that the public are looking at, right? I don't think they want a grand vision on this stuff. I don't think they want magic pudding solutions where you've got huge sweeping tax increases that are, dressed up as loopholes to get back into the renationalisation of childcare and massive unfunded climate policies that no one really knows what it boils down to. What's the cost going to be on me, on my business? They don't understand that. They've had enough of that. What they want is a competent guy who comes in and delivers what he says he'll deliver. And that's where the focus of the campaign's going.
I think they want a bit of change, and that's the key.
We will see in, 2.5 weeks or so from now. Ben Oquist, Dave Gazzard, always good to talk to you both. You get right down into the policy weeds. I appreciate it. We'll catch up next week. All right, we're going to take